a video, I believe. So we actually changed the plans again, and it's wonderful because we now have the honor to be able to introduce Peter Lerner, who is a spokesperson for the IDF, who will be able to give us a briefing today about the security situation, and then we will open it up for Q&A. Please, Peter.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Maya. It's good to be here. I have a very strong history of being on the Jewish Media Summit, and it's great to be here once more. Unfortunately, under the current circumstances, I've been, in the last year, called back into military service after being retired for almost 7 years. But desperate circumstances and, of course, the extreme situation here in Israel demanded and required that I come back into service. So thank you for the invitation. I'm here to speak on behalf of Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, who unfortunately couldn't make it, but asked me to step in his place and give you a quick briefing about the current situation, where things stand, and perhaps a bit of where things can go. Of course, as you said, Mayan, I will open it afterwards for questions. I'm sure there are many questions about the security situation based on listening both to the video and also to Minister Shikli, so I can imagine there's a lot of interest. I think what's most important to understand is the strategic juncture Israel is at this time. I think the most important thing to understand is when Hamas decided to launch a war on Israel on the 7th of October, it basically determined the outcome of their existence as a governing authority, as a terrorist entity. Over the last 16 years, Hamas has built its defense capabilities, and in fact, it was a terrorist organization with a supplementary government. As a terrorist entity, it built the most expensive, expansive tunnel capabilities in the world, a tunnel capability that undermined the safety and security of the region. And when they decided to launch their assault on Israel's communities of southern Israel on the 7th of October, indeed, they penetrated the border across several locations, over the fence, at the fence, and around the fence at sea. Coming into Israel with thousands of terrorists and conducting that brutal attack against the people of Israel, the people of the kibbutzim, of the moshavim, and of the towns of southern Israel. The IDF was caught off guard. We had miscalculated the situation, and of course, the terrible and devastating outcome is something that the IDF is currently investigating, and there are individual and of course the most necessary steps that need to be taken in order to make sure that this strategic mistake can never happen again. What happened, though, on the 7th of October of 23 demanded that the IDF mobilize under the instructions of the government in order to change the reality on the ground. We have three core goals of this war effort as instructed by the government. First of all, to bring back the hostages. There are today 101 hostages remaining. I heard that both the minister commented on those and also was mentioned in the film. But we understand the conditions, the dire conditions that the hostages are being held in. And of course, this is a huge challenge. And basically, there are two ways to bring hostages home. Either through negotiation, which has happened over the course of the last year extensively on different levels in order to try and create the conditions to bring home hostages. And we've seen last November that we were able to bring back a significant amount of hostages through negotiation, but also through military operations on the ground. And those are extremely challenging to conduct. But of course, that is something that we have been able to do. And notable, of course, is the rescue operations that have been conducted under dire situation in densely populated areas, specifically where Hamas has strategically positioned its capabilities within the civilian arena, trying to create an operational challenge for us to conduct those operations. Over the course of the year, the IDF, and this relates to the second goal, is dismantling Hamas as a governing authority and a terrorist entity systematically, which ultimately means that if their seat of government was Gaza City, we went to Gaza City. If they utilized the locations that traditionally are protected, like hospitals, like UN facilities, well, they, in their presence there, undermines the protections that these facilities usually have, and the IDF has mobilized through locations where Hamas has operated. And in parallel, and so on, and I can say that the vast majority of Hamas battalions, of the 24 battalions that it had throughout before the war, have now been rendered disbanded, dismantled, and incapable to conduct a 7th of October attack again. And I would say that the vast majority of their leaders, the commanders, those that instructed, trained, and conducted the 7th of October massacre, have also been pursued and hunted down. And also those that tried to put up a fight in their positions in northern Gaza, in central Gaza, and in southern Gaza, have been either killed in engagements or targeted strikes. And this is a routine that we see time and time again, that no matter where and who replaces the replacement, we will pursue them. That is the determination, and that is necessary. Ultimately, these two things combined, of the hostages released and the dismantling of Hamas, will result in the third goal, which needs to be achieved: a new security regime on the southern front with Gaza, a security regime, a security reality for the people of Israel that they're no longer posed a threat from the Gaza Strip, such as that happened on the 7th of October 2023. Over the course of the operations, we've seen quite significant characteristics of the battlefield. Those characteristics include how Hamas had prepared the battlefield inside the Gaza Strip. So every neighborhood we went to, we found how Hamas had built tunnels, conducted and pre-positioned combat facilities in different areas, all interconnected, all intertwined with different mobility capabilities, such as ambulances, such as hospitals as part of their network, and such as the United Nations UNRWA headquarters, which was supposed to be, from their perspective, their type of Iron Dome to protect us from conducting a strike. And indeed, we found exactly where Hamas had positioned its database beneath the headquarters of UNRWA. And so if we look where we are today compared to 2023, Hamas has pursued their leadership. As you recall, in mid-October, soldiers, IDF soldiers, on an operational patrol, killed Yahya Sinwar. But it's not only Sinwar that's been taken out. It is the rank and file, and it is the senior leadership, and it's the commanders that have all been pursued on the tactical level, on the operational level, and on the leadership level. So we are effectively looking at something new in the Gaza Strip, and what we can see is the development, and even as we speak in the last few days, there is still combat taking place, but it's much more guerrilla warfare type battles that are taking place, small ambushes that terrorists are setting up, either with explosive devices or RPGs. And this is the type of challenge that the IDF forces are facing. Currently, I can say that there are 3-4 positions that the IDF is maintaining and operating in. In northern Gaza, the reality is that there are forces conducting combat specifically in northern Gaza, because we identified that they were planning to try and launch a significant attack on the 7th of October this year. And so we went in. Yeah, Mayan?
Sorry, please
we
go ahead.
went in on the 7th of... Sure. We went in on the 7th, before the 7th of October, to prevent and foil any attempt that Hamas could have to try and mark the anniversary of that very, very solemn and sad day in Israel with more acts of terrorism. The IDF is mobilized currently dismantling and preventing Hamas from rebuilding itself in key strongholds such as Jabalia, Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun in the north of Gaza Strip. The second location the IDF is currently positioning in is the Netzarim corridor, which is a main area in central Gaza, and it gives us the operational advantage to conduct rapid mobilization, rapid deployment against threats that could be originating. And of course, it makes it very difficult for the terrorists themselves, Hamas terrorists or Islamic Jihad terrorists, to try and conduct attacks against Israel. And the final position, of course, is the very, very famous, the border, the route between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, the Philadelphia corridor, which before the war was a strategic thoroughfare for smuggling of weapons and other contraband between Egypt and the Gaza Strip, including money and all different types of other materials. There are tunnels there that could enable movement of vehicles. So that is the current situation of the war that is taking place against Hamas in Gaza. And I would say we are definitely on the upper hand, but still not complete. The operation and the war effort is not fulfilled until we bring home the 101 hostages. I'll turn now to the northern front, Hezbollah, which was also mentioned by the minister and the video. And I think what is important to note about Hezbollah is we know for a fact that they were planning to conduct a 7th of October type attack. We know precisely because in 2015, they broadcasted their plan to attack the Galil, to conquer the Galil. And I remember seeing on the 7th of October what Hamas was doing and immediately identifying this is exactly what Hezbollah was planning to do from Lebanon. So their plan of operation was to storm into the border across various positions under heavy bombardment of rockets, missiles, and drones, and indeed conquer key locations, military bases, but also conduct massacres inside the civilian communities across the border. The IDF on the 8th of October, as Hezbollah began their operations against us, had a rapid mobilization and was able to secure the border with a very rapid reinforcement to prevent that type of infiltration. Although mostly because of the heat of what was happening in the south, most of the world media didn't even understand that there were at least 7 attempts to infiltrate or into the north of Israel from the border of Lebanon. They were all foiled effectively, but they did try, not on a wide scale, not in an organized manner like what happened on the 7th of October, but on the 8th of October, there was potential for a significant deterioration. And where we are today is that since the 8th of October last year, Hezbollah has fired something like 17,000 missiles, rockets, and drones at Israel. And this became an unbearable reality precisely because we evacuated 60,000 Israelis from the border areas. And the government has instructed us in September to mobilize against Hezbollah to change the security situation to enable the people to go back home. We are currently operating, I would say, on 3 key efforts against Hezbollah in Lebanon. First of all, the immediate vicinity of the border area. So dismantling the attack infrastructure that Hezbollah had positioned over the course of almost 20 years now. We've seen extensive tunnels, we've seen multiple rocket launch systems across the frontier. We've seen with the amount of rockets that they fired at us, extensive capabilities. So that's one key effort. That is where we're seeing the ground forces operating. They continue to operate today for almost 2 months now. And this, I think, is a very significant move and a very important move to create a new significant security reality and to permit Israelis to go home in the north. The second element of our operational activity is to dismantle Hezbollah's strategic assets. So Hezbollah had accumulated something like 200,000 missiles, rockets, and drones over the course of 20 years. That is a very significant number, and imagine the ability of them having something like 3, 4, 5,000 rockets to be able to launch at Israel a day. That is what they were planning. And so while what we've seen in the last 2 months, we've seen a fluctuation, but they're probably around the average of around 100 to 150 rockets, missiles, drones per day fired at Israel. It's not what they planned. It's precisely because of the strategic effort of taking out their strategic capabilities, including precision-guided missile capabilities, the weapons manufacturing capabilities. And that leads me to the third strategic effort. The third strategic effort weighs upon the capabilities of Hezbollah to bring in weapons. Now, some of them are indeed...
Peter, I just want to let you know we do have some questions, so if you can try to, I'm sorry, wrap it up soon. We'd love to be able to get those asked from our audience.
Yeah, I would just finish on a couple of minutes here. And this is the third component of Hezbollah's effort. What they were trying to, or what they have been doing beyond the production within Lebanon, is to bring in from Iran to through Syria and to Lebanon. The idea of that capability means we needed to take out those capabilities in the Syria-Lebanon border, where they had accumulated the smuggling capabilities. And that is the last point that I want to say, and then we can open it for questions extensively. Neither Hamas nor Hezbollah would have any of these capabilities were it not for Iran. Iran is the destabilizer of the region. Iran, with its nefarious intentions, built these proxies on our border in order to create a sense of destabilization, and I would say also a level of threat. But we've shown in the last 2 months with abilities to strike not only against Hezbollah, not only against its proxies in Iraq, not only against the Houthis in Yemen, but also across Iran, strategic assets that send a very clear message that your proxies have failed, beware, you are going to fail as well. And with that, I'll welcome any questions.
Thank you so much. That was such an important briefing for all of our listeners to hear. I do want to remind the audience that you can put questions into the chat. If you didn't manage to do so until now, please feel free to add those questions. We'll get started with the first question from one of our viewers, which is regarding the hostages. You mentioned the 101 hostages that are still, unfortunately, in the grips of Hamas. What information do we have in terms of how many hostages are alive and would even be able to come back to their families?
So the working assumption, of course, is that we need to bring all of the hostages home. We need to, there are 101 hostages, there are 101 families, the families of 101 people that have been torn to pieces over the last almost 14 months now. Our responsibility is to bring them all home, whether they are alive or whether they are not. And of course, without going into any specifics, because we don't want to be too revealing to what we know and what we don't. I think that there is a moral responsibility to the families and to the hostages themselves to bring them home. So yes, of course, there are, and we understand that several of those have been killed, and that Hamas is holding their bodies as hostages as well. But our responsibility is to all of the hostages, and we have to work together in order to make sure that they can come home.
And in follow-up to that response, Peter, we do have another question from our viewers, which is regarding the efforts being made to bring those hostages home. I know you can't share, obviously, too much military detail, but what do some of those efforts look like in order to rescue the hostages if, God forbid, the negotiations don't pan out?
So we've shown on several occasions that we do have operational capability, but it's important to understand the level of threat, of challenge, of putting the hostages at risk by rescue mission is extensively high. And so when their opportunity raises, we need to calculate all of those considerations together. And so I would say if we have an opportunity to bring hostages home in a special forces type operation, that means that we can rescue the hostages, then we need to be able to put that into the motions and deliver. But we don't want to risk the hostages, and we don't want to jeopardize their safety and security. And I think these are the dilemmas that the Israeli defense establishment is facing, I would say, every single day. We need to operate, as I said, on both channels, the negotiations on one hand, but also the special forces or special operations delivery or realization when those opportunities based on intelligence and the calculation of the success assessment is in our favor.
Now, certainly there has been quite a lot of press in the international media condemning Israel for the lack of aid that people believe is not getting to the Palestinian people. We, of course, know internally that much of that is getting in and much is being hijacked by Hamas. But the question from our viewers is this. Well, what can we do to better, as a spokesperson, share the information about the amount of aid that is going in? Can you work more closely with COGAT to ensure that those numbers get out to a larger cohort?
Absolutely, we work extensively with COGAT. In my history, I was also the spokesperson of COGAT many years ago, and so we work together with them in order to have a synchronized effort. We are encouraging them to distribute, and we are amplifying. And that is what I can say. It is really important that you use the information that COGAT and the IDF is distributing across multiple platforms. They throughout the course of the war, established a website with all of the up-to-date data, and you can get it. You can sign up for their newsletter, which comes out every couple of days with new information of the amount of goods that are going in, the new routes. So just this week or last week, we opened another route, another crossing to alleviate some of the difficulties. And yes, indeed, it is very hard getting across the band waves in order to try and penetrate the media coverage of the story. I think it's really important that we tell the story in its full effort. The IDF is going to lengths to alleviate the difficulties of warfare, whereas Hamas, in contrast, is going to the effort to aggravate. And when we are trying to alleviate, and the image is only one of aggravation, amplified by humanitarian organizations or so-called humanitarian organizations that are operating in a way that undermines or, more importantly, empowers Hamas, we have to ask ourselves questions. So I would say absolutely yes. Utilize the data and the information, the details, the facts and figures that COGAT is putting out. We are amplifying it. Last week, we had several people, or a COGAT spokesperson that did extensive interviews on the world media, and he got quite good coverage. But unfortunately, the situation it is a war, and we have to keep in mind, despite the fact that we are doing everything we can, and I would say extensively, our enemies are taking advantage of the situation. They are trying to exploit it. And at the end of the day, it is a war, and people are suffering because in wars, and since the dawn of war, civilians have always been caught up in the midst of battle. We have to do what we can in order to alleviate those difficulties. We go to unprecedented lengths to limit the civilian casualties, to mitigate the civilian impact of the war. And that is despite the fact that our enemy, Hamas, has done everything to aggravate and make it more severe for the people of Gaza. So, of course, this war could be over tomorrow. Hamas needs to lay down its weapons and return the hostages, and nobody needs to suffer anymore.
So, Peter, this is the last question that we have tonight. And speaking of ending this war, the question that we have is this. Does the military see a way to end the wars either in Gaza or in Lebanon through military might? Or is this going to require some kind of ceasefire agreement with international entities? And do you have a timeline for when that end might come?
That's a very good question. And I did hear that Minister Shikli did relate to some of it. I think from the military's perspective, we've maintained that there needs to be a combined effort of diplomacy and military pressure. It's the very well-known military theorist that suggested that war is political intercourse by other means. And so, of course, the political outcome that we need for the border with Lebanon, for the people, so that 60,000 Israelis can go home again, is that Hezbollah does not have weapons looming on the people of Israel ever again. And so there needs to be a political outcome. There's been reports of an improved United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701. But from my perspective as the military, we will continue to do the war fighting. The diplomats need to do the diplomacy. And I think the same theme and the same concept needs to work also for the Gaza Strip. The political outcome needs to be dictated by the political echelon. We need to continue to pursue Hamas wherever they are and make sure that they do not have the ability to rebuild the capabilities that they had prior to the 7th of October. That is a reality Israelis will never allow to happen again.
Well, thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, for joining us tonight from the IDF spokesperson office. Your analysis was very important. Finally, I have the privilege of introducing Israeli diplomat David Saranga, Acting Deputy Director General for Public Diplomacy in the Foreign Ministry, who will talk about the ministry's work during the war and the importance of the diplomatic arena. He will be our final speaker tonight.
Today, Israel is fighting on 4 different fronts. First is the military front. The second one is the legitimacy. The third one is the juridic one, the ICC, the ICJ, and of course, the diplomatic front. All these 4 fronts are combined and one influences the other. We cannot deal with one of these fronts without taking into consideration all the rest. And therefore, when it comes to public diplomacy, when it comes to our fight for Israel's legitimacy, we have to understand that it influences all the other fronts. And therefore, we at the Foreign Ministry decided to focus on the groups, on the different groups, on the different segments of society in which we believe that we will do the best. And I explain myself. In the past, when we spoke about public diplomacy, we used to divide the world into 3. The people who are on our side, on Israel's side, we can call them the choir, the supporters of Israel. On the other edge, we had the people who are against Israel. No matter what Israel is doing, they will criticize Israel, they will attack us. And in the middle, we used to have what we call the silent majority. Many people who don't really know or care about what's happening in our region. After October 7th, the world has changed. And I believe that today, the world is divided into 2. You are either with Israel or you are with Hamas. We decided that we have to focus today on these people who understand the complexity of the situation, but moreover, people who are willing to have a dialogue with us. What we have seen in the last year is something that many segments of societies or many segments in the West, I don't think they want a dialogue with us. I don't think they want to accept any idea coming from our side. So we don't have anything in common with these groups. When we see people who are demonstrating on campus against Israel, people who are waving with posters calling from the river to the sea, calling for the annihilation of Israel, these are not groups that we have a dialogue with them. These are not people that it's worth having a dialogue with them. I think our biggest challenge, there are few main challenges that we are dealing with these days. One of them is all social media platforms. Social media platforms have become a threat to democracy. But at the same time, it's also a vehicle for us to bring our message across. But we have to take into consideration the hate speech that we see on these platforms, the fact that when it comes to numbers, we, Israel or Israel supporters or the Jewish community, we are a minority. And if we take into consideration that there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, comparing with 15, 16 million Jews in the world, you see that the numbers here do not help us. So we have to think what we can do on social media and how we can better use the social media platforms in order to bring our message to the world. It became very clear that this is one of the challenges that we as a government, we as a foreign ministry, we have to address is anti-Semitism. And the anti-Semitism of today is different than what we used to see in the past. Even though the roots are the same roots, even though there are many elements who are similar to what we have seen in the past, we don't have to forget that these elements still exist, and we have to find ways to tackle this phenomena. If I want to be more specific, I can say that the anti-Semitism that we see on campus, especially in the West, especially in North America, is something that we are all have to be worried about, and we are worried about. The third challenge is to try to think about the day after. The brand, the Israeli brand, used to be a very strong brand before October 7th. After October 7th, and after the images coming out from our region, I know that after describing what I have just described, people feel that the situation is difficult, that the situation is very complicated, very complex situation. But I have to say that I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic because the values we are fighting for are values that resonate in the West. They are values in which many societies understand. And I don't want to say that we here in Israel, we are fighting the war of the Western civilization. But I think that the public starts to understand that what we are facing here in the region, whether it's from Iran, whether it's from Hezbollah, of course, whether it's from Hamas, I think that the world, or many in the world, start to understand that what Israel is experiencing is something that people in the West, should take into consideration. So with this optimistic note, I hope to see you all soon in Israel. I'll be very happy to continue this dialogue and to have it as a dialogue while you are going to be here, because for us, the Jewish community and also the people who are on our side, the people who fight for the message of Israel to come across, the people who helps us to bring our message across, we should have this dialogue, and we'll be also very happy to pick up your mind and to see how we can do better in this complex situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Saranga, and thank you all for joining us tonight. The role of the international Jewish media is essential in bringing Israel's story to the world, and your dedication to this mission is invaluable. I'm Maayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV News, and it has been an honor to be with you here tonight. I want to remind you about the opportunity to join us here in Israel in March and to take part in the Jewish Media Summit. Before we end, I want to call on all of you to rise and join us in the singing of Israel's national anthem. Shalom from Israel, and may you have a peaceful and safe evening.
שנות 2000 להיות המחור חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים.
See you in Jerusalem in March. God bless us all.
עם ישראל.